In a world that praises democracy, the word dictator provokes fear and revulsion. But history tells a more complex story. Some ruled with iron fists, but left behind peace, prosperity, and progress. Today we explore the 10 best dictators in history, leaders who, despite authoritarian rule, shaped their nations for the better. In the Republic, Plato envisioned a philosopher king, wise, just, and uncorrupted by the masses. For Plato, democracy could easily decay into mob rule, while the ideal ruler would govern not for power, but for truth and virtue. Centuries later, Thomas Hobbes wrote of life without authority as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes believed that peace required a sovereign, even an absolute one, to protect the people from chaos. What if they were right? What if some dictators weren't tyrants but guardians, ruling not with cruelty but with purpose? Let's begin. 10/Nayib Bukele, the millennial strongman of El Salvador. He tweets more than he talks. El Salvador was the murder capital of the world until Nayib Bukele jailed tens of thousands in a brutal crackdown on gangs, but crime fell to historic lows. To some he's a populist tyrant, to others Hobbes' Leviathan reborn, harsh but necessary. 9/Antonio de Oliveira Salazar of Portugal, the reluctant ruler. A professor turned autocrat, Salazar ruled Portugal with a cold, clerical calm. His Estado Novo valued tradition and stability over liberty. His methods were repressive, but in a Europe torn by war and revolution, Portugal stayed neutral, intact, and surprisingly modern. 8/Fidel Castro of Cuba, the revolutionary father. He toppled a dictatorship, then became one. Castro banned opposition yet gave Cubans universal healthcare and literacy. For the West, a villain. But for many in Latin America, the rare leader who stood up to empires and endured. 7/Spain's Francisco Franco, the survivor. After civil war, Franco ruled a wounded Spain with unyielding authority. He stifled democracy, but avoided World War II, opened the economy, and prepared Spain, albeit unintentionally, for democratic transition. 6/Park Chung-hee, the industrial autocrat of South Korea. A military man who built a nation. He was so frugal he placed bricks in the cisterns of the presidential residence to save water. Park pushed South Korea from poverty to prosperity with relentless speed. Political freedom? Non-existent. Economic growth? Explosive. Plato might have called him a necessary guardian of the state. 5/Josip Broz Tito of Yugoslavia, the balancer. Tito held Yugoslavia together through sheer force of charisma and control. He defied Stalin, played East and West, and gave his people relative freedom, until his death cracked the fragile unity he built. He ruled alone, but never entirely selfishly. After genocide, Rwanda needed order. Enter 4/Paul Kagame, the technocrat of Africa. Kagame delivered order, and much more. Corruption dropped, education rose, and cities gleamed. Critics point to authoritarian tactics, but many Rwandans see him as a Plato-style guardian, firm, precise, incorruptible. 3/Mustafa Kemal Ataturk of Turkey, the enlightened autocrat. He abolished the Sultanate, banned the fez, and built a secular republic from the Ottoman ashes. Ataturk enforced modernity from above, convinced that only an elite few could lead the many into light. His methods were strict, but his vision transformed a dying empire into a modern nation-state. 2/Deng Xiaoping of Red China, the reforming architect. Deng didn't shout slogans, he opened markets. He allowed capitalism in a communist state, lifting hundreds of millions from poverty. Arguably the greatest eliminator of absolute poverty in history. He ruled with quiet force, never seeking praise. His reforms built the world's second-largest economy, at the cost of political freedom. And finally we come to Singapore for our #1 spot, a leader so legendary he flipped the script. 1/Lee Kuan Yew, the philosopher king of the East. Lee Kuan Yew didn't believe in Western-style democracy. He believed in results. His country didn't even want independence. It was small, weak, and vulnerable, with no resources, and had to even buy its water from neighboring Malaysia. Plagued by discord and riots, he brought out his iron fist. Under his watch, Singapore became one of the safest, richest, and most efficient countries on earth. He censored the press, jailed opponents, but eradicated corruption, built public housing, and championed education. He is probably the only man in history who has on his resume the words, "From third world to first." For many, he is the embodiment of Plato's philosopher king, educated, incorruptible, and deeply pragmatic. They weren't elected to be loved, they ruled not by consent, but by competence. Flawed, firm, and fiercely focused, they were the guardians of their nations in uncertain times. Maybe Plato was right. Maybe democracy isn't the only path to order, progress, and even greatness. Who would you add to the list? What defines a good dictator? Comment below.